The air in Leo's cramped, book-lined apartment always smelled of old paper and freshly ground coffee. It was a scent of comfortable stagnation, one that Maya had found reassuring for the better part of a decade. Today, however, it felt suffocating. She sat cross-legged on his worn-out corduroy sofa, a fortress of legal pads and highlighters surrounding her, while he moved about his small kitchen, the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine a familiar soundtrack to their friendship. So, the Henderson merger is finally, blessedly, over, Maya announced, tapping a manicured nail on a spreadsheet. Which means I can finally dive into the Q3 projections without wanting to fling my laptop out the window. Leo placed a steaming mug of black coffee on the coaster beside her. The Herculean efforts of Maya Sharma, corporate warrior, are once again complete. The city is safe. He leaned against the doorframe, a tall, lanky man with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that defied his otherwise boyish demeanor. He taught literature at a local community college, a world away from her high-stakes life in corporate finance. Maya offered a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She stared into the dark depths of her coffee as if searching for an answer. Yeah, safe. Leo didn't miss the flatness in her tone. He knew her tells better than anyone. The way she chewed the inside of her cheek when anxious, the slight tremor in her left hand when exhausted, the hollow victory in her voice when a major deal closed. He'd been her cheerleader since their freshman year of college, celebrating her promotions, listening to her vent about incompetent colleagues, and reminding her of her own formidable strength. But lately the cheers felt rote. "What's up, May?" he asked softly, sliding into the armchair opposite her. "You have that look." "What look?" "I've just run a marathon and discovered the finish line is just the starting line of another, slightly more depressing marathon look." A genuine, weary laugh escaped her. "That's scarily accurate." She pushed the legal pads away, as if physically clearing space. "Leo, what am I doing? Right now? Avoiding your Q3 projections." "No. In general. With my life." She looked at him, her dark eyes wide and unguarded. "I'm 32. I have a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and a stock portfolio that would make my father weep with pride. And I feel absolutely nothing. It's like I'm a ghost moving numbers from one spreadsheet to another, making rich people slightly richer. I haven't felt a real, genuine spark of joy on a Tuesday afternoon in years." Leo stayed quiet, letting her unravel. This was more than standard work burnout. This was a fundamental tremor. "Remember in college," she continued, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window, "when I used to paint? Terrible, angsty abstract stuff, but God, I loved it. The smell of turpentine, the feel of the brush, the sheer physicality of creating something from nothing. I'd lose whole weekends to it." "I remember," Leo said, a fond smile touching his lips. "You got more paint on my couch than on the canvas. I still have a blue splotch on my favorite jeans." "I'm serious," she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "That person feels like a stranger. I traded her in for a pantsuit and a 401k. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that precedes a leap from a great height. "I'm going to do it, Leo. I'm going to quit." The words hung in the air, simple and monumental. Leo didn't gasp or try to talk her out of it. He simply looked at her, at the fierce, terrified determination on her face, and felt something shift deep within him. This wasn't his successful, capable friend complaining. This was a phoenix preparing to immolate itself. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "What's the plan?" Tears welled in her eyes, born of relief and fear. "The plan is, there is no plan. Not a sane one, anyway. I have some savings. I'm going to paint." "Paint what?" "Anything. Everything. I don't know. I just know I have to try, or I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Leo stood up, walked over to the sofa, and carefully moved a stack of her financial reports to the floor. He sat beside her and pulled her into a firm, brotherly hug. Then you have to try, he whispered into her hair. And I'll be here. I'll be your, what's the corporate term? Your change management consultant. Your career change cheerleader. Maya laughed through her tears, hugging him back tightly. You're ridiculous. I'm serious. You've spent your life building other people's empires. It's time to build your own, even if it's a messy, paint-splattered one. As he held her, feeling the slight tremble in her shoulders, a new and startling thought bloomed in his mind. He had always seen Maya as brilliant, fierce, and beautiful, his best friend, a constant in the chaotic narrative of his life. But in this moment of raw, terrifying vulnerability, in this declaration of war on her own comfortable unhappiness, he saw a different kind of strength, a dazzling, reckless, and utterly captivating courage. It was the first flicker of a light he had never noticed before, and it was blinding. The resignation was a spectacle. Her boss, a man named Mr. Davison whose tie was always too tight, had alternated between disbelief and thinly veiled panic. Who would manage the Henderson account? Who understood the Byzantine intricacies of the quarterly reports? He'd offered her a sabbatical, a raise, a promotion. But Maya, fortified by Leo's unwavering support, had held firm. The corner office was emptied. The pantsuits were relegated to the back of her closet. And for the first time since she was a teenager, her calendar was a terrifying, beautiful blank. She rented a small, north-facing studio in a slightly grungy but vibrant part of the city. It had large, factory-style windows, scuffed hardwood floors, and the distinct, dusty smell of potential. Leo helped her move in, hauling canvases, an easel, and boxes of paints that still bore their college-era price tags. The first month was a honeymoon period of pure, unadulterated freedom. Maya would send Leo pictures of her works in progress, a vibrant, chaotic cityscape seen from her window, a still life of her coffee mug and a wilting flower, a series of abstract pieces fueled by the lingering stress of her old life. They were raw and uneven, but they were alive. Leo's cheerleading took a practical turn. He'd show up with groceries, knowing she'd forget to eat. He'd drag her out for walks when she'd been staring at the same canvas for 8 hours straight. He became her first and most honest critic. "The color here is amazing," he'd say, squinting at a canvas. "But the composition feels safe, like you're still trying to balance a budget instead of breaking the rules." His feedback, drawn from a lifetime of analyzing texts, was incisive and invaluable. He wasn't just telling her she was great. He was pushing her, challenging her to be better, to be an artist. But by the third month, the honeymoon was over. The fear began to creep in. The savings account, once a comfortable cushion, now seemed to be evaporating at an alarming rate. The canvases started to feel like enemies. Self-doubt, a quiet hum in the background, became a deafening roar. Leo found her one Tuesday afternoon sitting on the floor of her studio, her head in her hands, surrounded by half-finished, aggressively slashed paintings. The air was thick with the smell of frustration and white spirit. "I can't do this," she mumbled, her voice thick with tears. "I'm a fraud, a 32-year-old woman playing at being an artist. I'm going to have to call Davison and beg for my job back." Leo's heart ached for her. This was the valley, the inevitable dip after the peak of rebellion. He knelt beside her, his knees popping in protest. "Look at me, Maya." She lifted a tear-streaked face. There was a smudge of crimson paint on her cheek. "You are not a fraud," he said, his voice low and intense. "A fraud doesn't feel this much. A fraud doesn't destroy their own work because it isn't perfect. You're an artist in the trenches. This," he gestured at the carnage around them, "is part of the process. It's ugly and it hurts, but it's real. It's 1,000 times more real than any spreadsheet you ever touched. My savings. We'll figure it out. I have some money put away. You can pay me back when you're famous." "Leo, no, I can't." "You can, and you will if you need to," he insisted. "This isn't a hobby, Maya. This is your life now, and you don't get to give up at the first sign of trouble." Not after you've come this far. He reached out and gently wiped the paint from her cheek with his thumb. The simple, intimate gesture sent a jolt through both of them. Their eyes met, and for a suspended moment, the air crackled with an unspoken charge. The familiar boundaries of their friendship seemed to blur and thin. Maya looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the steadfast loyalty in his eyes, the absolute belief that had become her anchor. She saw the man who had spent his afternoon comforting her amidst her failed creations, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine, profound faith in her. The moment passed, but the echo remained, a silent vibration in the space between them. "Okay," she whispered, her voice steadier. "Okay." She got up, walked over to a fresh, blank canvas, and stared at its terrifying whiteness. Then, she picked up a piece of charcoal and, with a fierce, decisive stroke, slashed a single dark line across its center. "Okay?" Leo echoed, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was no longer just cheering for his best friend. He was in awe of the woman she was becoming. The crisis passed, leaving a harder, more resilient artist in its wake. Maya's work began to change. The safe, balanced compositions gave way to something more visceral, more emotional. She started a new series, large-scale portraits that were less about physical likeness and more about capturing the inner landscape of a person. Their fears, their joys, their quiet despairs. Her first subject, unsurprisingly, was Leo. She convinced him to sit for her in her studio. He brought a book, but mostly they just talked about life, about books, about their fears for the future. For hours, she would study the lines of his face, the way the light from the large window caught the gray just starting to thread through his dark hair, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he listened. The painting that emerged was a revelation. It was Leo, but it was also so much more. She had captured his gentle intelligence, his wry humor, but also a profound, underlying solitude that she had always sensed but never fully seen. She had painted his kindness. It was, without a doubt, the best thing she had ever created. When she finally turned the canvas to show him, he was speechless. He stared at it for a long time, his own image reflecting a depth he rarely acknowledged in himself. "Maya," he finally breathed, This is incredible." "You see?" she said, her eyes shining with triumphant tears. "This is what I was meant to do. Not to manage, but to see." It was the breakthrough she needed. Emboldened, she began painting portraits of other people. The old baker downstairs with flour permanently etched into his wrinkles. A young dancer from the studio across the street, her body a map of strain and grace. She poured every ounce of her newfound confidence into her work. And as her art flourished, so did the subtle shift in her relationship with Leo. The easy, physical familiarity of their friendship, the hugs, the playful shoves, became charged with a new awareness. A lingering touch, a glance held a second too long. The way his name sounded different on her lips. Leo found himself thinking about her at the most inopportune times. Grading papers, he'd remember the fierce concentration on her face as she mixed paints. Walking to the college, he'd see a splash of vibrant color on a wall and his mind would immediately conjure her. The love he felt for her, once a steady, platonic constant, was transforming, deepening into something richer, more complex, and utterly terrifying. He was falling in love with his best friend. The conflict was internal but brutal. He was her anchor, her cheerleader. To introduce this new, romantic tension felt like a betrayal of that role. What if she didn't feel the same? What if it ruined everything? He watched her, now so fully in her element, so dazzlingly alive, and felt both immense pride and a sharp, aching loneliness. He was witnessing her rebirth, but he was no longer sure of his place in her new world. The turning point came at a small, pop-up gallery show she managed to get into. It was her first public exhibition. 3 of her portraits were on display, including the one of Leo. She was a nervous wreck, dressed in a simple black dress that was a world away from her corporate armor, yet she looked more powerful than he had ever seen her. He stood in a corner, watching her talk to strangers about her work, her passion lighting up her face. She was magnetic. A well-dressed man, an art critic from a local blog, was particularly engrossed, standing a little too close, his hand resting lightly on her arm as he complimented her technique. Leo felt a hot, unfamiliar spike of jealousy. Later, as the crowd thinned, the critic was still there, his interest clearly not confined to her art. Maya was laughing at something he said, and Leo saw the man hand her his business card, his fingers brushing against hers with unmistakable intent. Something in Leo snapped. The careful walls he had built around his heart crumbled. He couldn't stand by and watch this. Not tonight. Not after everything. He walked over, his movements deliberate. "Maya," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. "Ready to go? We should celebrate." The critic looked slightly put out. Maya glanced between them, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Oh, sure. Leo, this is Mark. He writes for Urban Canvas." "Mark, this is my best friend, Leo." The word best friend felt like a dagger. Leo forced a smile and shook the man's hand, his grip perhaps a fraction too firm. After Mark had departed with a final, lingering look at Maya, she turned to Leo. "What was that about?" "Nothing," he muttered, gathering their coats. "He was just smarmy." They stepped out into the cool night air, the silence between them heavy and uncharacteristic. The city lights blurred around them as they walked towards her apartment. "You were amazing tonight," Leo said finally, the words feeling inadequate. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You know that, right?" He stopped walking, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. The dazzling light he had seen in her months ago was now a steady, brilliant flame. "I do know that," he said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm not here out of duty, Maya." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "Then why are you here, Leo?" "The dam broke. Because I'm in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out in a raw, desperate rush. "Not as my best friend. Not as my project. I'm in love with the woman who had the courage to burn her life down and build a more beautiful one from the ashes. I'm in love with the artist. I'm in love with you. And it's terrifying, and it probably ruins everything. But I can't stand by and watch another man look at you like that and not say anything." Maya stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. The sounds of the city faded into a distant hum. She saw the truth in his face, in the vulnerability that mirrored her own from months ago in his apartment. And she realized that the new, steady ground she stood on, the ground of her passion and her purpose, had been laid brick by him, her cheerleader, her critic, her rock. And she saw him now, not as the familiar boy from college, but as the man who had stood in the wreckage of her dreams and told her to keep going. The man whose quiet strength had become the foundation of her new world. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, eclipsing the glow of the street lamp. "Leo," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You idiot. You were the one who taught me to be brave. Did you really think I hadn't fallen for my own teacher?" And there, on the quiet sidewalk, with the city as their witness, he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a cheerful best friend, but of a man in love with a dazzling, brilliant woman. A kiss that tasted of paint, coffee, and a future they would now build together. 1 year later, the gallery was packed, a hum of excited conversation filling the high-ceilinged space. This wasn't a pop-up show. It was Maya Sharma's first solo exhibition, titled The Brightest Shift. The walls were adorned with her powerful, emotive portraits. In the center of the main wall hung the painting of Leo, now with a small, discreet red dot on its label indicating it had been sold. He had refused to let her sell it to anyone else. Leo stood by the champagne table watching her. She was speaking animatedly to a collector, her gestures confident, her eyes alight with passion. She wore a dress the color of a stormy sky, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. An older woman approached him, gesturing towards the portrait. "That's a remarkable piece. The artist sees you very deeply." Leo smiled, a full, effortless smile that reached his eyes. "She does," he said, his gaze finding Maya across the room. "She sees everything." As if sensing his thoughts, Maya excused herself and walked towards him. She didn't stop until she was wrapped in his arms, her head resting against his chest, right where it belonged. "Nervous?" he asked, kissing her hair. "Not with you here," she murmured. They had navigated the shift from friends to lovers with the same honesty and care that had defined their friendship. It wasn't always easy. They had to learn new rhythms, establish new boundaries. But the foundation of unwavering support was already there, stronger than ever. He was still her first and most honest critic, and she was still his greatest source of inspiration. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. She looked up at him, her love for him shining in her eyes, a masterpiece more dazzling than any painting in the room. "We did it," she said. And he knew she didn't just mean the exhibition. She meant the career change, the leap of faith, the terrifying, beautiful, and brilliant shift that had led them here, to this moment, to this life they had built together, a canvas filled with the most vibrant colors of all.